Think Again: The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know, by Adam Grant. Introduction. Picture this. It's a scorching August afternoon in Montana, 1949. 15 men drop from the sky. They're not skydivers out for a thrill, they are smoke jumpers, the most elite wildland firefighters in the world. Their mission is to parachute in and extinguish a forest fire sparked by lightning. They land near a place called Man Gulch. The fire is visible across the ravine, so they start making their way down the slope toward the river. The plan is simple: dig a line around the fire, contain it, and starve it of fuel. But in an instant, everything changes. The foreman, a man named Wagner Dodge, sees something that makes his blood run cold. The fire has jumped across the gulch. It's now a wall of flames, 30 feet high, and it's heading straight for them. In less than a minute, it will blaze across 2 football fields. The plan to fight the fire is gone. Now, it's a desperate race for survival. Dodge turns his crew around and they start running, scrambling up an incredibly steep, rocky slope covered in knee-high grass. For 8 agonizing minutes, they push themselves to their limit. Safety is just 200 yards away, at the top of the ridge. But then, Dodge does something that baffles his crew. Something that makes them think he has gone completely insane. He stops running. He bends over, pulls out a book of matches, and starts lighting the grass in front of him. One of his men watches in horror and thinks, "That bastard Dodge is trying to burn me to death." With the inferno roaring up behind them, their leader is lighting another fire right in their path. Dodge waves his arms toward his new fire and yells, "Up! Up this way!" But no one follows. They can't comprehend it. Why would you run towards a fire? Their training, their instincts, everything they've ever learned screams at them to run away. Tragically, 12 of those men will perish in the gulch. A melted pocket watch later found on one of the victims would show the hands frozen at 5:56 p.m. But Wagner Dodge survived. How? Because in that split second, with death closing in, he was able to do something the rest of his crew couldn't. He was able to think again. He wasn't smarter than his men. He was just more mentally flexible. That fire he lit wasn't an act of madness, it was an act of genius. It was an escape fire. By burning the fuel in front of him, he created a pocket of safety. He laid down in the charred ashes, covered his mouth with a wet handkerchief, and let the massive wildfire rage over him. This is the power we're going to talk about today. It's a power that's more important than raw intelligence, more crucial than grit, and more valuable than any skill you'll learn in school. It's the power of knowing what you don't know. Today, we're diving into the brilliant mind of Adam Grant and his landmark book, Think Again. In the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you the secret mental toolkit used by the world's best forecasters, the most creative leaders, and even the most persuasive negotiators. By the end of our time together, you'll understand why the ability to rethink and unlearn is the single most important skill for success and happiness in a rapidly changing world. You will learn not just how to open your own mind, but how to gently open the minds of others. This isn't just about winning arguments. It's about learning, growing, and navigating a complex world with wisdom and grace. So, let's begin our journey and learn how to master the art of thinking again. Book summary. Have you ever met someone who is absolutely brilliant, but completely stuck in their ways? We all have. We tend to think that being smart is about how much you know. But Adam Grant starts with a fascinating, almost counterintuitive idea. In today's world, what matters more is how good you are at rethinking what you thought you knew. Think about Mike Lazaridis. You might not know his name, but you definitely know his invention, the BlackBerry. In the mid-2000s, it was the device. Presidents, celebrities, business leaders, everyone had one. It was so popular that people called it the crackberry. Lazaridis was a genius, an electronics wizard who built his company into the fastest growing on the planet. By 2009, BlackBerry owned nearly half of the U.S. smartphone market. But by 2014, its market share had plummeted to less than 1%. What happened? It wasn't a single bad decision. It was a failure to rethink. When the first iPhone came out, Lazaridis was impressed by its computing power, but he remained convinced that people wanted a device for work emails, not a computer in their pocket for entertainment. He was certain that a physical keyboard was superior to a touchscreen. He was preaching the virtues of what had made him successful in the past, and he was prosecuting the flaws of this new approach. He was so wrapped up in being right that he couldn't see the world was changing. This is a trap we all fall into. Adam Grant explains that when we think and talk, we often slip into one of three mindsets. He calls them the preacher, the prosecutor, and the politician. When we're in preacher mode, our sacred beliefs are under attack, so we deliver sermons to protect and promote our ideals. We're defending our truth. When we're in prosecutor mode, we see flaws in other people's reasoning. We marshal arguments to prove them wrong and win our case. We're attacking their truth. And when we're in politician mode, we're trying to win over an audience. We campaign for approval, lobbying for the support of our constituents. We're trying to sell our truth. The problem with these three modes is that they all have one thing in common: they stop us from rethinking our own views. They are all about being right. But what if the goal isn't to feel right, but to be right? That requires a fourth mindset, the scientist mode. When you're a scientist, you don't start with answers, you start with questions. Your identity isn't tied to your beliefs, it's tied to the search for truth. You form a hypothesis, but you're not attached to it. You test it. And if the evidence proves you wrong, you don't see it as a failure. You see it as a discovery. You get to be less wrong than you were before. This isn't just a metaphor. Researchers ran an experiment with over 100 Italian startup founders. They split them into two groups. The control group got standard entrepreneurship training. The other group got the exact same training, but with one twist: they were taught to think like scientists. Their strategy was a theory. Their product was an experiment. Their customers provided the data. The results were astonishing. Over the next year, the startups in the control group averaged less than $300 in revenue. The startups in the scientist group, they averaged over $12,000. Why? Because the scientists were more than twice as likely to pivot. When their hypothesis was wrong, they didn't double down. They rethought their entire business. They were willing to unlearn what wasn't working. The smarter you are, the harder this can be. High IQ can actually be a curse when it comes to rethinking. Smart people are faster at recognizing patterns, which makes them more likely to fall for stereotypes. And when faced with data that contradicts their beliefs, their intelligence can become a weapon against the truth. They're just better at finding reasons to support what they already wanted to believe. Adam calls this pattern being good at thinking, but worse at rethinking. The solution is to decouple your identity from your opinions. Your beliefs are not who you are. They are just a set of hypotheses you're currently testing. And when you find a better one, you should be excited to trade up. This leads to what Adam calls the rethinking cycle. It starts with intellectual humility, knowing what you don't know. That humility leads to doubt. That doubt leads to curiosity. And that curiosity leads to discovery. This is the engine of learning. The opposite is the overconfidence cycle. It starts with pride, which leads to conviction. That conviction makes you a preacher and a prosecutor, leading you to seek out only the information that confirms your beliefs. This leads to validation, which only reinforces your pride. This is the engine of stagnation. Mike Lazaridis was trapped in an overconfidence cycle. He was so proud of his keyboard that he couldn't see the world wanted a touchscreen. Meanwhile, at Apple, Steve Jobs was initially dead set against making a phone. He hated cell phone companies and thought it was the dumbest idea he'd ever heard. But his team kept pushing him. They acted like his challenge network. They didn't attack him, they made him curious. And eventually, he was willing to run the experiment. 4 years after it launched, the iPhone accounted for half of Apple's revenue. Jobs knew how to think different, but it was his team that helped him to rethink. So, if the scientist mindset is the goal, what holds us back? A big part of it is our relationship with confidence. We often think of confidence as a simple spectrum, from low to high. But it's more complicated than that. Imagine two candidates running for president of Iceland. One is Davíð Oddsson. He was the prime minister who privatized the country's banks, and then the central bank governor who let them balloon to 10 times the national GDP, leading to the worst financial meltdown in human history relative to its size. Time magazine named him one of the 25 people to blame for the global financial crisis. Yet, here he was, running for president, saying, "My experience and knowledge, which is considerable, could go well with this office." He was supremely confident. This is what Adam calls the armchair quarterback syndrome, where confidence far exceeds competence. He was blind to his own weaknesses. The other candidate was a woman named Halla Tómasdóttir. She was a successful entrepreneur who had guided her investment firm through that same crisis. When a petition started for her to run for president, her first thought was, "Who am I to be president?" She had no political background. She felt like a fraud. This is the imposter syndrome, where competence exceeds confidence. She was blind to her own strengths. Oddsson is a classic case of the Dunning-Kruger effect. This is a fascinating psychological quirk where the people who are the least competent in a given area are the most likely to be brimming with overconfidence. It's because the skills required to be good at something are often the same skills required to recognize how good you are. If you don't know anything about music, you don't have the tools to judge your own singing. You think you sound great. This happens because we all start as novices, but as we gain just a little bit of knowledge, our confidence skyrockets way faster than our competence. We climb to the top of what some have hilariously called Mount Stupid, where we know just enough to feel like an expert, but not enough to realize how much we don't know. The antidote to getting stuck on Mount Stupid is humility. But humility doesn't mean having low self-confidence. Adam makes a crucial distinction here. Confidence is your belief in yourself, your ability to learn and achieve. Humility is about being grounded, recognizing that you don't have all the answers and that your current tools might be flawed. The sweet spot is confident humility. You have faith in your ability to achieve a goal in the future, while maintaining the humility to question whether you have the right tools in the present. This is the mindset that fuels rethinking. It gives you enough doubt to re-examine what you know, and enough confidence to go out and discover what you don't. And what about that imposter syndrome Halla felt? We usually think of it as a bad thing, but Adam suggests it can have surprising benefits. Feeling like an imposter can motivate you to work harder to prove yourself. It can make you work smarter, because you question assumptions that others take for granted. And it can make you a better learner, because it keeps you humble enough to seek out new insights. Halla used her imposter syndrome as fuel. It kept her on her toes. While other candidates ran traditional campaigns, she was experimenting with Facebook Live and Snapchat. In the end, she didn't win, but she came in second, trouncing Davíð Oddsson, who finished a distant fourth. Her doubt didn't hold her back, it propelled her forward. Great thinkers don't harbor doubts because they're imposters. They maintain doubts because they know we're all partially blind, and they're committed to improving their sight. This brings us to a really beautiful idea: the joy of being wrong. Our immediate reaction to being wrong is often shame. My son once burst into tears when we found out his new cousin was going to be a girl, not because he wanted a boy, but because, as he cried, we were wrong. We see our beliefs as extensions of ourselves. When they're challenged, it feels like a personal attack. Our brain has a little dictator inside, what psychologists call the totalitarian ego, whose job is to protect our self-image by filtering out threatening information. That's why we get so defensive. One of the participants in a deeply unethical Harvard study from the 1950s where students' core beliefs were viciously attacked, never got over it. His name was Ted Kaczynski. He later became known as the Unabomber. His manifesto is a chilling display of absolute conviction, with no room for doubt. But what if we could detach our opinions from our identity? The Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman once listened to Adam Grant present some research that surprised him. Kahneman's eyes lit up, a huge grin spread across his face, and he said, "That was wonderful. I was wrong." He genuinely enjoys discovering he was wrong, because it means he is now less wrong than before. He says, "My attachment to my ideas is provisional. There's no unconditional love for them." That's the key. To unlock the joy of being wrong, we need to detach. First, detach your present self from your past self. As the founder of Bridgewater, Ray Dalio, says, if you don't look back at yourself and think, "Wow, how stupid I was a year ago," then you must not have learned much in the last year. Second, detach your opinions from your identity. Who you are should be a question of what you value, like curiosity, learning, and fairness, not what you believe. Your beliefs are just hypotheses waiting to be tested. This is the mindset of the world's best forecasters, people who compete in tournaments to predict global events. The single most important driver of their success isn't intelligence. It's how often they update their beliefs. The average competitor updates their forecast about twice per question. The super forecasters, they update it more than 4 times. They are constantly in a rethinking cycle. They see their opinions as hunches, not truths. So, we've talked about opening our own minds. But what about opening the minds of others? This is where things get really interesting. Most of us approach arguments like a war. We arm ourselves with logic and data and try to overwhelm our opponent. But a good debate isn't a war. Adam says it's more like a dance. In a war, you try to gain ground. In a dance, you have to move in rhythm with your partner. Sometimes you lead, sometimes you follow, and sometimes you have to step back. Expert negotiators do this instinctively. Instead of preparing for battle, they spend over a third of their planning time looking for common ground. And when they make their case, they don't pile on a dozen reasons. They present fewer, stronger arguments. Too many reasons just give your opponent more things to shoot down. And most importantly, they ask a lot of questions. They're not trying to force their partner into a corner, they're inviting them to dance. Let's see this in action. The world debate champion, Harish Natarajan, is facing off against a new opponent on the topic of subsidizing preschools. His opponent, Deborah, is brilliant. She opens with a joke, cites study after study, and even anticipates Harish's counterarguments. Going into the debate, the audience is overwhelmingly on her side. Harish's approach is different. He starts by saying, "I think we disagree on far less than it may seem." He finds common ground on the problem of poverty before he even begins to question the solution. He doesn't present a mountain of data, he focuses on just 2 key concerns. And he peppers his argument with questions for the audience to ponder. In the end, Harish sways the audience. Support for subsidies drops significantly. What's amazing is that his opponent, Deborah Jo Prickett, wasn't a person at all. It was an anagram. Her real name was Project Debater, an IBM artificial intelligence. This machine had been fed 400 million articles. It could craft a logical argument, detect claims, and even make a joke. But it hadn't learned the most human part of persuasion, finding common ground. It hadn't learned to dance. The more hostile someone is, the more important this becomes. When someone attacks you, your instinct is to attack back. But what if you sidestepped? Instead of arguing about the topic, have a conversation about the conversation. You can ask, what evidence would change your mind? If the answer is nothing, then you know there's no point in continuing the debate. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it think. This art of persuasion goes even deeper when we face prejudice and stereotypes. This is something the musician Daryl Davis knows better than anyone. One night in 1983, after playing a country music gig, Daryl, who is black, found himself having a drink with a member of the Ku Klux Klan. Instead of fighting or fleeing, Daryl got curious. He started a conversation that led to a friendship. And that friendship led to the Klansman leaving the KKK. Since then, Daryl has convinced over 200 white supremacists to abandon hate. How? He doesn't preach. He doesn't prosecute. He listens. He asks questions. He finds common ground, often through their shared love of music. He helps them see the arbitrariness of their hatred. Adam and his team tried to replicate this effect with one of the most heated rivalries in sports, the Boston Red Sox versus the New York Yankees. They found that just reminding fans of their common identity as baseball fans didn't work. Humanizing a single fan from the rival team also fell short. People just saw that person as an exception. What did work? Getting them to reflect on how arbitrary their hatred was. When fans were asked to think about how, if they'd been born in a different city, they would likely be a fan of the rival team, their animosity softened. They assigned less spicy hot sauce to be sold in the rival stadium. This is called counterfactual thinking, imagining how your beliefs could have been different. It destabilizes stereotypes by revealing their shaky foundations. But the ultimate tool for opening minds, the one that Daryl Davis and the best persuaders use, is listening. This brings us to a powerful technique called motivational interviewing. It was developed by a psychologist named Bill Miller to help people with addictions. The core idea is that you can't force someone to change. You have to help them find their own motivation to change. It's not about being a cheerleader or a critic, it's about being a guide. You hold up a mirror so they can see themselves more clearly. Arnaud Gagneur is a doctor in Quebec who uses this technique with parents who are hesitant about vaccines. He doesn't lecture them with facts. He starts with humility and curiosity. He asks open-ended questions to understand their fears. He listens reflectively. And he affirms their desire to do what's best for their children, and their ability to make that choice. He doesn't tell them what to do. He empowers them to find their own reasons to vaccinate. The results are remarkable. In his studies, a single conversation significantly increased vaccination rates. This same principle of listening allowed a Ugandan peace negotiator named Betty Biggin to open a dialogue with the brutal warlord Joseph Kony. While others had come to preach and prosecute, she came to listen. She sat for hours by bonfires, just taking notes. As she says, even the devil appreciates being listened to. This brings us to the final part of our journey. How do we create entire communities of lifelong learners, whether it's in our families, our schools, or our workplaces? It starts with having more nuanced conversations. We have a tendency for what psychologists call binary bias. We simplify complex issues into two opposing sides. Pro-choice versus pro-life. Pro-gun versus anti-gun. This isn't just wrong, it's counterproductive. In a fascinating experiment, people who disagreed on abortion were brought together. Before they talked, they read an article about gun control. If the article presented the issue as a simple two-sided debate, less than half the pairs could find enough common ground to write a joint statement on abortion. But if they read an article that complexified the gun control issue, showcasing many different viewpoints and shades of gray, 100% of them found common ground on abortion. Seeing complexity in one area opened their minds to finding it in another. We need to resist the urge to simplify. A great conversation about a charged topic should feel less like a courtroom battle and more like an anthropologist's field notes. This is especially true in education. Great teachers don't just give students new answers, they teach them new ways of thinking. A teacher named Erin McCarthy gives her 8th grade students old textbooks from the 1940s to show them how knowledge evolves. Her final project isn't to take a test, but to pick a chapter from their current textbook and rewrite it, adding the perspectives that are missing. Another legendary teacher, Ron Berger, a former carpenter, brings an ethic of craftsmanship to the classroom. He teaches his students, even first graders, that quality means rethinking and reworking. He has them do multiple drafts of their work, like a drawing of a butterfly. A student named Austin did 6 drafts of a butterfly drawing, each one getting better based on feedback from his classmates. By the end, a simple sketch had transformed into a scientifically accurate and beautiful piece of art. He learned that great work doesn't happen on the first try. It's a product of rethinking. This is the kind of culture that was missing at NASA before the Challenger and Columbia space shuttle disasters. NASA had a brilliant performance culture, focused on excellence and results. But this led to overconfidence. When engineers saw small problems, like O-rings failing or foam falling off, they normalized them because past missions had succeeded anyway. They were held accountable for outcomes, not for their decision-making process. This is the danger of focusing only on results. A good outcome with a bad process is just luck. A bad outcome with a good process is a smart experiment. To build a learning culture, we need psychological safety, the freedom to raise concerns and make mistakes without fear of punishment. And we need process accountability, evaluating how thoroughly people have thought through their decisions. Ellen Ochoa, the first Hispanic woman in space, helped instill this at NASA. After the Columbia disaster, she became a leader who championed psychological safety. She was once the lone no vote to delay a launch when everyone else was ready to go. In the old culture, she might have been silenced. In the new learning culture, the NASA administrator called her and said, "I'd like to understand your thinking." They delayed the launch, found the root cause of the problem, and likely prevented another tragedy. This brings us, finally, to our own lives. We all have plans. A career path we set in college. An idea of the person we want to marry. But these plans can give us tunnel vision. Adam's cousin, Ryan, knew he wanted to be a neurosurgeon from the time he was in kindergarten. He had the passion and the perseverance, the grit. But he escalated his commitment for 16 years, ignoring flickers of doubt along the way. He was so focused on staying on track that he foreclosed on his identity prematurely. By the time he became a neurosurgeon, he was burned out and realized it wasn't the right path for him. He eventually found his way, co-founding a successful health tech startup. But his story is a powerful reminder that there's a fine line between heroic persistence and foolish stubbornness. Sometimes, the best kind of grit is knowing when to quit. We shouldn't ask kids, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" as if it's a final destination. We should ask them what kinds of problems they want to solve and what kinds of things they love to do. A career isn't an identity to claim, it's a set of actions to take. And we shouldn't be too fixated on finding happiness. The more we chase happiness, the more it eludes us. Happiness is often a byproduct of 2 other things, mastery and meaning. Meaning often comes from contribution, from making things better for others. As the philosopher John Stuart Mill wrote, "Those only are happy who have their minds fixed on some object other than their own happiness." We don't need a 10-year plan. Life is an open system. A plan is like driving at night in the fog. You can only see as far as your headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way. All you need is a plan for the next step, and the willingness to rethink it. Commentary. As we come to the end of our journey through Think Again, it's worth pausing to reflect on just how profound this central idea is. In a world that rewards conviction and certainty, Adam Grant makes a compelling case that our greatest strength lies in our ability to question ourselves. This isn't just an intellectual exercise. It's a way of being. It's the humility to admit that you don't have all the answers. It's the courage to sit with the discomfort of doubt. And it's the curiosity to constantly seek out new knowledge, even if, especially if, it contradicts what you currently believe. The stories in this book stay with you. The image of Wagner Dodge lighting an escape fire, defying every instinct to save his life. The quiet courage of Daryl Davis, sitting down with men who hate him and choosing conversation over confrontation. The wisdom of Ellen Ochoa, whose lone dissenting voice at NASA reminded an entire organization that safety depends on the courage to rethink. These stories show us that rethinking isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. It's the mark of a secure identity, one that isn't threatened by being wrong, but is energized by the opportunity to learn. So, how can you start putting this into practice today? Here are 3 simple actions you can take. First, build a challenge network. You probably have a support network, people who cheer you on. That's important. But you also need a challenge network, 1 or 2 people you trust to point out your blind spots. Find a friend, a family member, or a mentor who you know will be honest with you. And give them permission. Say to them, "I respect your opinion, and I need you to challenge my thinking from time to time." Second, practice the joy of being wrong. The next time you realize you're mistaken about something, no matter how small, a fact you misremembered, a direction you got wrong, try a different internal response. Instead of feeling a flash of shame, try feeling a flicker of surprise and delight. Say to yourself, or even out loud, "That's interesting. I just learned something." This small shift can retrain your brain to see being wrong not as a threat, but as an opportunity. And third, in your next disagreement, ask how instead of why. When we ask someone why they believe something, they tend to dig in their heels and preach. But when you ask them how their idea would work in practice, it often reveals the gaps in their own understanding. It gently moves them from a preacher or prosecutor into a more scientific, problem-solving mindset. And it does the same for you. Think Again is more than a book. It's an invitation. It's an invitation to lead a more curious, more humble, and ultimately, a more fulfilling life. It's a reminder that the goal of learning isn't to affirm our beliefs, it's to evolve our beliefs. That was a summary of Think Again by Adam Grant. We've covered the core ideas today, but a summary is just a map, it's not the journey itself. The real magic happens when you read the book and a particular story or idea lands in a way that's personal to you. This summary is here to help you decide if this book is worth your time. If anything we've talked about today sparked your curiosity or challenged your thinking, I highly recommend grabbing a copy. Reading it isn't just about absorbing information, it's an experience that can fundamentally change the way you see yourself, your beliefs, and the world around you. You can find a link to the book in the description below. Also, if you found this summary valuable, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It lets me know that these journeys are helpful, and it ensures you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book. Let's keep growing together.